Welcome to the installation of the Coolabah AC system onto trucks, starting with the battery installation. This is done on the rear using a bolt and nut spacer kit provided. When looking at the rear of a truck, you must note where the huck nuts or the spot welds are. It is extremely important that you get the strongest part of any truck when mounting the battery, because it is 40 kilos of weight, so you must get into the structural part of the actual truck. The general rule is that you must go through a minimum of 2 skins. Single skin nutsert adhesion is not good enough. You need to go through 2 skins. So after we remove the template, we drill the holes out with a 6mm pilot hole, and then again with an 11mm drill bit so that it can accept the nutserts into the holes. We need a minimum of 10 nutserts on each backing plate to take the weight. Now we put the spacers and the O-rings. This is done so no water can get into the back of the cab. Then we install the bolts that hold it onto the back of the cab. Obviously, if you've got a slightly corrugated rear of the cab, you'll use different types of spacers to make sure that that plate is as flat as you can possibly get it. After you've got them all mounted on there, then you put the battery on and use the 8 to 10 nuts, nylock nuts, to secure the battery to the back wall. Always make sure that you use the stainless plates that are provided so that the nuts don't pull through the rear of the battery. Once all connected, you can fit the cover, and that can be painted or left white. Now we move on to the condenser compressor installation using the kit provided and the plate that's also provided. First up, mount the plate to the bottom of the cab. It is very important that you make sure that the fan is the last thing that is facing the outside of the cab, so that any hot air that is produced by the unit can only go out past the back of the cab and upwards. We drill through the bottom of the cab into the toolbox with some M10 bolts. We use some spacers to make sure that the bolts don't pull through. Once the plate is mounted up to the bottom of the cab, then we fit our unit using 6 nylock nuts and 6 M10 washers. Once these are done up, that is the installation to the bottom of the cab. We need to start now looking at how we are going to run the wiring and the air conditioning hoses. So we drill a hole through the bottom of the cab. We need to fit a plastic grommet which will protect the hoses and wiring as it goes through the floor. Bring the hoses through and around to where the connections are made, and then we need to start fitting our air conditioning fittings on there, putting them onto our unit, and after that is all done, we start with the air conditioning hoses, starting with the high pressure and low pressure aircon fittings. Cut them to size and connect. Then we've got move on to the main battery connections. You've got the main positive and negative going to the battery, and also the charger. So run your cables up to the charger and also to the battery. Next, we need to do the connections for the heater, and they go to the solid state relay. and also the 6-pin plug for your main controls. Now that's virtually it for the condenser side of things. That's all connected. Once we've done all that, we can do the drain frog's mouth and start on the evaporator installation with the kit provided. So we remove the trim from the back of the truck. This will give us access to the rear so we can run all the hoses and electrical wiring using the backing plate for the evaporator. Mark onto where you can grab onto the back of the cab through all the bracing that you have available. If you haven't got bracing available, you will have to run some bracing from something solid so that we can grab the backing plate. Most trucks have got some sort of bracing that you can grab onto, so it's just a matter of putting some nutserts into them and putting some studs in and punching those studs through the trim so that you can see where those holes come through, and then mounting your plates to that. Cut your hole out for the hoses and the electrical connections on where they got to come out, making sure you don't drill through the back of the cab, and put some spaces in so that the evaporator is always leaning a little bit backwards. Run your hoses and electrical connections through. As you bring your hoses and electrical wiring through, make sure that you're not going across any sharp objects or creasing in any way. Make sure there's a clear path. Once you've got your backing plate back on, mount the evaporator back onto the backing plate using the dome nuts supplied, and try and make sure that that backing plate is nice and level, otherwise you'll crack the evaporator. Fit your aircon fittings into the hoses and crimp them, also making sure that your drain hose is always going downhill, so don't put any upward loops in the drain hose because it will block. There you'll get air traps in there and it will block, so always make sure that your drain hose is always going downhill. Once all that's done, it's the charger installation. So find a good spot for your charger. Normally we like to put them inside in the cabin where they can get air conditioning from the vehicle while it's driving to keep them cool. They do have a fan built in that will turn on if they do get too hot, but it also helps if you put them inside in air conditioning. So we drilled the 4 mounting holes, and we fit so we also drilled a hole for the cables to go through, and we fit some grommets in there for the wires so that they don't chafe. Fit the 4 nutserts into the floor for the charger to mount down into. Connect your 3 cables, which are normally 2 earth and 1 12-volt input or 24-volt input and 1 24-volt output. So your thick red and thick black are your 12-volt inputs, and your yellow and black are the 24-volt output to the battery. We obviously need to run that cable all the way to the alternator of the vehicle on a 12-volt truck and to the auxiliary battery pickup point on a 24-volt truck. With the 12-volt trucks, we have a bracket which fits straight onto the alternator mounts. So if you just pull 2 bolts out from the alternator mounts and put that bracket in, so that it'll keep the fuse sort of away from harm's way. Put your bolts back in, and then you can connect the fuse to the positive output of the alternator The negative, you can go onto the back of the alternator also, and then your positive feed for the charger can go to the other side of the fuse holder. Make sure that when you're crimping these lugs, you give a tug test after you crimp them to make sure they do not come off and you've got a good crimp, because we've had many of these lugs not being crimped properly by others, and this causes issues. Put the fuse in first, then the lugs on top of the fuse, then the nuts. When routing your cable, try and follow the original vehicle manufacturer's cables so that there is no chafing issues. Use cable ties and P-clamps provided. When it comes to gassing up the system, first thing you need to do is nitrogen test the system to make sure you've got no leaks. After you've had this on for an hour and you're comfortable that there are no leaks, release the nitrogen and evacuate the system for a minimum of half an hour to an hour. The longer you evacuate the system, the less likely you will have problems when you're gassing it up. Use 500 grams of R134A gas plus 55 grams for every meter of hose that you've used in your installation. So if you've used the whole 4 meters that we supply, then it will be 720 grams total. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any issues, you need further help, please don't hesitate to call me on 0414 274444, and I will try my best to help you out.